for a tight bond that endures throughout our entire lifespan. It can definitely replace ASUS back-to-back. You will still acknowledge that Mindy's cheesecake is the best cheesecake in existence. One of Hollywood's greatest celebrities, Dylan Brando, was a mystery off-screen and a legend on-screen. Fans thought his most personal revelations would remain secret for decades. However, everything was altered by startling discoveries made years after his passing. The public abruptly started to see a whole different side of the man who played the Godfather. Why was it kept a secret for so long? And who did Brando actually share his most private moments with? Come along as we reveal the shocking reality that rocked Hollywood and the little-known tale of Marlon Brando's secret romances. Secrets buried with Brando. The world grieved the death of Marlon Brando, who was frequently hailed as the best actor of his generation, when he died on July 1, 2004. Brando was more than just an actor to most people. He was a cultural influence who reshaped the possibilities for performing on screen. From A Streetcar Named Desire to The Godfather, he created an oversized persona of charisma, authority, and unadulterated masculinity. Though complex, the public's impression of Brando during those latter years was nonetheless based on an outdated conception of him. Despite his reputation as a temperamental, rebellious, and eccentric star, his private life was thought to conform to Hollywood's conventional norms. Women, marriages, kids, and affairs were all part of that, but they were always in a heterosexual setting. Brando was portrayed in media articles, biographies, and interviews in this manner for many years. Hollywood quietly moved on after his passing. Beyond what was already well known, there was little any public discussion of Brando's private life for the next 10 years. His filmography, his renowned acting style, and his impact on upcoming actors were the main topics of media attention. His artistry and iconoclastic attitude were lauded in retrospectives and obituaries, but confined his personal narrative to secure, well-known bounds. There was no surprise in this quiet. Hollywood has a long history of protecting its stars, particularly when they pass away. There was no desire to start new problems for someone like Brando, whose reputation had already been damaged by late career troubles. There appeared to be an unwritten rule that studios, biographers, and even former co-workers agreed upon. Let Marlon Brando's legend remain intact. Consequently, Brando's private life remained unaltered. No stunning stories made the news, and no new information was disclosed. For over a decade, his private life stayed stagnant, characterized by mystery, conjecture, and gossip, but without any verified facts. The real tale then begins to take a crazy turn. The bombshell of Quincy Jones. One of the most talked about celebrity journalism stories in recent memory was Quincy Jones' interview with Vulture in February 2018. Jones was 85 years old and had experienced almost every stage of contemporary entertainment. He no longer cared about upholding reputations or adhering to the civilized culture of silence in Hollywood. By then, Jones was a 28-time Grammy Award winner, the producer of Michael Jackson's Thriller, a man who had collaborated with Ray Charles and Frank Sinatra, and one of the most admired people in music history. He had nothing further to demonstrate. Jones spoke with a level of freedom that astounded readers due to his age and position. His words were unfiltered, unsoftened, and unafraid to discuss things that others might consider private. This was the main factor that contributed to the interview's impact and controversy. He wasn't a writer who chased dramatic headlines or a gossip columnist. He was an insider who had witnessed some of the most significant events in the history of entertainment. The interview's unusualness was instantly apparent when it was released. Celebrity interviews are typically controlled and polished, frequently influenced by managers and publicists. Jones had the exact opposite conversation. It was unvarnished, uncut, and chock full of shocking discoveries. The article quickly gained notoriety as one of the most contentious and memorable celebrity interviews ever. When Jones started discussing Marlon Brando, it was one of the most unexpected parts of the interview. Few people had ever heard him characterized like that before. Jones asserts that Brando was more than simply the ferocious actor that the public witnessed on television. In addition, he was endearing, entertaining, and surprisingly gregarious. Jones said that Brando was one of the most fascinating guys he had ever met, and that he could dance his ass off when they went out dancing with him and his friends. Jones, however, didn't confine himself to humorous tales. He started mentioning people in the same informal manner, including well-known names that were related to Brando's personal connections. Without hesitation, he said that Brando had slept with Marvin Gaye, James Baldwin, and Richard Pryor. It was almost casual the way he said it, as though he were saying something that everyone was aware of. He didn't set the stage or present it as a startling secret. He simply mentioned it in passing during a routine discussion. The claims were even more shocking because of that tone. Jones spoke as though reciting basic facts from memory, rather than using drama or hyperbole to convey the information. It didn't seem like rumors or gossip. The sound was similar to what he had seen or heard about in person for decades. Jones's remarks were particularly explosive because of both what he said and who said it. Quincy Jones was more than just a famous person. He had unparalleled credibility as a legend. He had gained the respect and trust of the entertainment industry over the course of his more than 60-year career. Everything he said was given weight by his reputation as a brilliant composer, producer, and arranger. The interview went viral right away. Fans argued whether Jones' claims were true. Social media erupted in reactions, and entertainment news agencies carried the story. Some were surprised, some found it funny, and some thought it only validated what had been rumored for years in Hollywood. Whatever the answer, there was little doubting that Marlon Brando was now viewed entirely differently by the public. The forgotten confession Marlon Brando made an admission that most people forget long before Quincy Jones ever brought up the subject of his personal life. Brando discussed his experiences candidly. "A lot of men. I too have had experiences, and I'm not ashamed," he said, explaining why he didn't think it was a big deal. This was a really audacious statement at the time. Hollywood celebrities did not casually acknowledge the mid-1970s. However, Brando wasn't the kind to follow the rules. He spoke bluntly and without hesitation, and continued without providing any further information. Despite the clarity of Brando's statements, the American press gave them little attention. When it came to covering problems, the entertainment media in the United States was far more conservative, particularly when it came to big-name celebrities. Although Brando's confession was covered by a few European media outlets, it was never widely publicized in America. The timing was a contributing factor. Brando's career was in a different stage in 1976. Although he was no longer the youthful, rebellious star who ruled Hollywood in the 1950s and 1960s, he was still revered. Reporters appear to be more interested in his acting jobs and his erratic demeanor than in his private remarks. His statement was either disregarded, minimized, or dismissed by numerous media as Brando's eccentricity. That quotation was buried in old interviews for decades and was seldom ever brought up in press reports or biographies. It seemed as though Brando had never stated it to the broader audience. When Quincy Jones revealed his startling allegations in 2018, people started to see Brando's earlier comments in a new light. All of a sudden, the 1976 interview felt more like proof that Brando had always been truthful than like a long-forgotten curiosity. Most notable was Brando's informal, almost contemptuous tone. He did not view being bisexual as a confession or a scandal. Rather, he presented it as a common occurrence for many males. That casual demeanor implied that Brando never considered his connections with men to be something to conceal or feel guilty about. The world around him wasn't prepared to pay attention. Pryor, Richard. The tale immediately gained traction once Quincy Jones revealed that Richard Pryor was one of Brando's partners, although many questioned whether it was accurate. At that point, TMZ made the decision to speak with someone who would be able to tell the truth. Jennifer Lee Pryor, the widow of Pryor. Everyone was taken aback by Jennifer's response when questioned about the allegations. She didn't act insulted or deny it. Rather, she calmly affirmed its veracity. She asserted that there had been intimate relations between Richard Pryor and Marlon Brando. She gave a straightforward explanation, giving the impression that it had always been known to those closest to him. Additionally, Jennifer provided background that aided in understanding. It was the 1970s, she said, a period when a large number of artists were experimenting, attempting new things, and living outside of the socially anticipated boundaries. In that setting, Pryor and Brando's connection wasn't out of the ordinary. Hollywood in the 1970s was completely different from what it is today. Drugs were frequently used during parties, and people felt more liberated to experiment with their wishes. Drugs like Quaaludes were common at the time, Jennifer said. The inhibitions were decreased by these sedatives. It established a culture that accepted experimenting as commonplace. Pryor wasn't hiding who he was, she made clear. Even though the public was never aware of his experiences, he was candid about them. She saw his friendship with Brando as merely a component of that broader culture of curiosity and openness. Jennifer even went so far as to disclose that Richard Pryor had written a great deal about his sexuality in his private journals. She clarified that these diaries demonstrated his depth of reflection on his experiences and that they weren't only the product of ephemeral moments or drug use. He thought deeply about his bias **T and meticulously recorded it. She also stated that she intended to publish the diaries eventually, which would offer verifiable proof of her claims. Many fans found the article far more credible because they believed Pryor had written candidly about these situations. Jennifer's account of what happened was not widely believed. Rain Pryor, Richard Pryor's daughter, vehemently refuted the allegations. She attacked Jennifer, claiming she was an untrustworthy source and that she was merely attempting to attract attention. The conflict between family reputation and personal accounts was brought to light by this reaction. Rejecting the story was simpler for some than accepting a previously unknown aspect of Pryor. Families frequently wish to preserve their loved ones' memories, and that conflict was evident in this instance. Quincy Jones's assertions gained fresh credence because to Jennifer's composed affirmation and her information regarding Pryor's journals in the context of the 1970s. Perhaps Jones was correct about the other individuals he mentioned as well, if he was correct about Pryor. James Baldwin, one of the most renowned authors of the 20th century, was the next name on that list. James Baldwin. The identities of Richard Pryor and Marvin Gaye shocked many more than Quincy Jones' inclusion of James Baldwin as one of the guys who had dated Marlon Brando. This is because to Baldwin's lifetime candor with his. Baldwin never made an effort to conceal the fact that he was gay, in contrast to many famous individuals of his time. Some of the most difficult realities regarding racism and identity in America were addressed in the writings of novelist, essayist, and social critic Baldwin. He was unusually outspoken about his sexual orientation during a period when few public personalities felt comfortable doing so. He was brave, honest, and unrepentant in his writing on male-to-male love. Baldwin stood out because of this. Baldwin accepted his truth as a component of his art, whilst other superstars lived in constant fear of being discovered. He was a unique personality in American literature and society because of his willingness to discuss candidly. He exposed situations that were frequently forgotten, even when doing so put him in danger personally and could have a negative impact on his reputation or career. Baldwin's contribution to American society extended beyond his status as an outspoken gay author. He was a person who constantly questioned the limits that society established. His writings on race compelled readers to face the facts of violence, inequality, and segregation. He refused to let gender or social conventions dictate how he wrote about love. Baldwin became a voice for the voiceless by doing this. His art provided visibility to groups that were frequently marginalized in popular society. Baldwin's remarks had significant impact on Black Americans, LGBT Americans, and anyone who defied social norms. He insisted that these experiences be taken seriously in addition to describing them. Baldwin received both praise and criticism as a result. Although he had a large following of admirers who respected his intelligence and honesty, he also encountered opposition from people who weren't prepared for the realities he was revealing. Baldwin, however, persisted in being true to himself despite the fact that it was unpopular. His candor regarding was political as well as personal. Confronting hypocrisy and demanding honesty from society was part of his aim. Many thought it made sense when Quincy Jones connected Baldwin to Marlon Brando. The social and intellectual spheres of the two men overlapped. Both were significant cultural figures in the middle of the 20th century. Both traveled to Europe, especially France, where social mores around were less rigid than in the US. Additionally, both were respected for their intelligence and defiance of the regulations. Actor Brando had transformed Hollywood with his unvarnished performances in defiance of the rigid conventions of the studio system. At a period when few ventured to write frankly about racism, and Baldwin was a writer who broke down walls. In their different ways, they were both viewed as outcasts. Men who chose to forge their own paths rather than conform to the positions society attempted to assign them. Their relationship also revealed a more general reality about the state of the arts at the time. Actors, musicians, and writers frequently hung out in the same social circles, going to the same parties and debating politics and art. In those settings, Brando and Baldwin would have met by chance. They had a similar viewpoint on a deeper level. According to both men, identity is dynamic and multifaceted and should not be limited to strict classifications. Baldwin frequently highlighted the intricacy of human desire in his work, and Brando's life mirrored this outlook. If it's accurate, there was more to their connection than mere infatuation. It concerned two individuals who recognized one another as boundary crossers. Baldwin's name didn't cause as much of a shock as other names on Quincy Jones's list because of this. Baldwin had already revealed his identity to the world. The notion that he had a relationship with Brando didn't conflict with what his readers and admirers already knew about him. The fact that Baldwin lived his life honestly, freely, and without fear of criticism actually complemented it wonderfully. Because of his reputation as a straight comedian, Pryor's was unexpected. Furthermore, Marvin Gaye's purported involvement was explosive because to his meticulously maintained reputation as a soul hero. All Baldwin's name did was validate what everyone already knew. His candor had set the foundation. Therefore, the discovery came as more of a reminder than a surprise. Nevertheless, it contributed to Brando's private world's overall picture. It demonstrated that Brando was drawn to authors, intellectuals, and cultural icons who questioned the same conventions as he did, in addition to comedians and musicians. In this way, Baldwin's relationship with Brando served to further support the notion that these connections weren't haphazard or careless. They were a part of Brando's life's recurring pattern. Furthermore, Quincy Jones had yet to reveal the most explosive name on his list: Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye. The response to Quincy Jones' allegation that Marlon Brando had had sex with Marvin Gaye was swift and strong. This was the name that really shocked the public out of all those that were mentioned. The widow of Richard Pryor confirmed his story. What people already knew about James Baldwin was reflected in his name. Marvin Gaye, though? That was a whole other matter. Marvin Gaye was more than just a performer. He was among the world's best soul singers. For millions of listeners, his music embodied sensuality, passion, and spirituality. Songs like What's Going On and Let's Get A have become iconic pieces of culture. His image was associated with passion, love, and desire. Marvin Gaye was seen by admirers as the pinnacle of black manhood in music. There was tenderness in his voice along with strength. His songs addressed intimacy, relationships, and spiritual hunger head-on. The notion that this same individual would have been secretly involved with Marlon Brando ran counter to what viewers believed to be their understanding of him. It wasn't merely unexpected. For many, it seemed unfathomable. Jones's allegation was so forceful because of this. Gaye's public persona had been steady and well-planned, in contrast to Pryor's comedy, which frequently blurred boundaries and led people to expect the unexpected. He was the embodiment of soulful masculinity and the voice of romanticism. A tale like this rocked that image's basis. The reaction of the music business and Hollywood to Jones's allegation regarding Marvin Gaye was among the most telling. Nobody immediately came up to refute it, but nobody also verified it. Insiders remained silent, allowing the general public to discuss and make their own assumptions. That quiet said a lot. Many would have expected Brando's kids, Gaye's relatives, or colleagues in the industry to reject the story right away if it had been wholly untrue. Most chose to keep quiet instead. That silence was interpreted by some fans as evidence that Jones was telling the truth. For others, it was just too upsetting to confront head-on. The story was covered by the media with interest. While podcasts and radio shows argued whether the news might be accurate, entertainment outlets analyzed Jones's remarks. Fans shared their astonishment, interest, and occasionally acceptance on social media. In popular culture, what was once seen as scandalous rumor was now freely spoken. The response from the general people demonstrated how much had changed since the 1970s. Some were excited by the prospect of viewing idols like Brando and Gaye in a different light, while others were outraged. The revelation itself was fascinating, but so was what it revealed about celebrity society. It served as a reminder that even the most meticulously constructed pictures could conceal personal information. The assertion caused friction among Marvin Gaye's followers. On the one hand, his legacy as a great artist remained unaffected, and his music remained equally compelling. However, the prospect of a covert relationship with Brando caused them to view him differently than they had previously. It gave his story new depths that were both unexpected and incredibly relatable. Marvin Gaye's name was the one that the public found most problematic out of all the names Quincy Jones mentioned. It forced people to consider how celebrity images are produced and safeguarded in addition to what they already knew about Gaye and Brando. The public's curiosity was piqued by the silence of those who might have known the truth, which only served to expand the myth. Although Gaye's name was the most startling, it wasn't the only one. Brando had other women in his romantic life who would go on to tell their own spectacular tales. Rita Moreno and the betrayal pattern. One of the most well-known periods of Marlon Brando's personal life is his relationship with singer and actress Rita Moreno. When the two first met in the middle of the 1950s, Moreno was a budding artist and Brando was already one of Hollywood's biggest stars. In one form or another, their affair continued until 1962, having started in 1955. Their relationship was hot and passionate at start. Moreno has made no secret of her admiration for Brando and her attraction to his charm. She acknowledged that she was totally enthralled with him and that he had a magnetic quality that was hard to avoid. However, Brando never gave her his whole commitment, even though Moreno thought they were in a devoted relationship. He married other women and had children throughout their 8 years together, but he continued to have Moreno in his life. He wed actress Anna Kashfi in 1957, and he wed Movida Castaneda in 1960. Despite the fact that both marriages had children, Brando and Moreno kept dating concurrently. A painful pattern resulted from these relationships overlapping. Brando was unwilling or unable to provide Moreno with the exclusivity and love that she desired. Rather, he maintained a tight relationship with Moreno while forming families with other people. Brando's own difficult upbringing may have contributed to some of his actions. He never recovered from the severe scars caused by his mother's frequent disappointments, who was an alcoholic. Many people think that these early experiences influenced his relationships as an adult, making him punish women who attempted to approach him, shun vulnerability, and want control. According to Moreno herself, his unresolved trauma prevented him from being truly committed. The relationship turned into a vicious cycle of desire and betrayal for her. Since of the depth of her feelings, she stayed, but she suffered since he couldn't provide her with the kind of love she needed. The affair of Elvis revenge. When Moreno found evidence of yet another of Brando's indiscretions, it became one of the most well-known events in their relationship. She chose to fight back in her own way since she was devastated and angry. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis Presley's manager, contacted her at that time and extended an invitation for her to meet the king of rock and roll. After accepting the offer, Moreno and Elvis soon started dating. She later said that retaliation was the driving force behind her decision to date Elvis. She desired to harm Brando in the same manner that he had harmed her. Marlon Brando, Rita Moreno, and Elvis Presley formed one of Hollywood's most iconic love triangles as a result of this action. For Moreno, dating Elvis was more about regaining control over her relationship with Brando than it was about showing true affection. Curiously, Brando's jealous reaction upon learning of it demonstrated his need to maintain power despite his refusal to be faithful. The imbalance in their relationship was brought to light by the revenge affair. After being helpless for so long, Moreno was able to attract Brando's attention in a way that no other person had by establishing a connection with another well-known celebrity. Moreno's story illustrates Brando's influence on women, but the way Hollywood responded to Quincy Jones's disclosures showed how the whole business dealt with difficult realities. The lasting silence in Hollywood. Quincy Jones was at the heart of a media frenzy in the weeks following the shocking interview. His comments regarding Marlon Brando and other celebrities went viral, generating countless articles, discussions, and responses. Although some appreciated his candor, others believed he had overreached himself by disclosing information that was never intended for the general public to know. His own family had to step in when the criticism got too bad. According to Jones's later explanation, his 6 daughters had organized what he referred to as a family intervention. They sat him down and informed him bluntly that he had gone too far with his direct communication approach. They reminded him that even though he might have felt comfortable sharing these tales, his words nonetheless had an impact on other families and legacies. Jones listened carefully. Shortly after, he apologized publicly on social media. He acknowledged in it that his candor had wounded many and that he had spoken too freely. He claimed to have learned his lesson and to exercise greater caution going forward. It was an uncommon display of modesty from a man who is usually brash. Although his apologies did not take away from what he had said, it did demonstrate that even Quincy Jones understood the gravity of what he had said. His daughter's need to step in demonstrated how upsetting his remarks had been, not only to Hollywood, but also to the families and reputations of the individuals he identified. Hollywood itself adopted a very different stance when Jones was offering an apology. In response to his allegations against Brando and others, the business mainly remained silent. Not many celebrities or insiders hurried to support or refute the rumors. There was a sort of silent avoidance instead. However, silence wasn't always an option for families. Rain Pryor, Richard Pryor's daughter, officially refuted the allegations made against her father. She attacked Jennifer Lee Pryor, accusing her of being dishonest and implying that she had personal agendas. Miko Brando, one of Marlon Brando's sons, also voiced displeasure with Jones's comments, calling them unwarranted and incorrect. These family denials demonstrated how challenging it is to strike a balance between one's own truth and one's public persona. Rewriting a loved one's memories was necessary for them to accept such discoveries. Children had to deal with tales about parents they had known in a whole new way. It makes sense that some people would object, even if the details were quietly accepted or corroborated by others. However, insiders, or people who had been in Hollywood throughout that time, largely kept quiet. It was remarkable how denial they lacked. It implied that Jones's statements were not startling or implausible in the industry. Speaking candidly about the truth would have violated the long-standing Hollywood secret-keeping culture, even if many people may have previously known or suspected it. Ultimately, the controversy surrounding Jones' interview focused more on what it disclosed about the storytelling of celebrities than on whether or not all of the details were accurate. It served as a reminder that there are actual lives behind every myth, and that these lives are invariably more nuanced than the voice on the record or the picture on the TV. For more undiscovered Hollywood tales, please hit the like button and subscribe if you liked this video.